The most powerful man in the known world spent his nights writing in a journal about how to control his own thoughts, not his military strategies, not his imperial decrees, not his plans for the future of the Roman Empire. His thoughts. Think about that for a moment. Marcus Aurelius had legions under his command. He had the power to decide the fate of entire nations with a single signature. He had more resources, more authority, more capacity for action on the external world than virtually any human being who existed before or after him. And what concerned him most wasn't any of that. It was what was happening inside his head. Every night, in a campaign tent on the Danube frontier, with the cold cutting from outside and the weight of governing the world on his shoulders, Marcus Aurelius opened his journal and wrote to himself, not for anyone to read, not for posterity, to remind himself who he wanted to be, to govern the only thing that, in his profound lucidity, he knew was truly difficult to govern: his own mind. Welcome to episode 7 of Master Your Mind. This is Stoicism for Winners. In the previous episode we worked on external silence, the first tool of mastery in interactions with the world. The 12 moments where staying quiet is more powerful than speaking, where silence isn't weakness but strategy, presence, chosen strength. Today we turn inward. Today we work on internal silence, the calm that doesn't depend on the world being at peace to exist, the stability that doesn't need circumstances to be favorable to hold, the governance of one's own mind that Marcus Aurelius practiced for decades in the most demanding conditions a human being can face, not on a spiritual retreat, not in the comfort of a life shielded from adversity, in wars, in plagues, in betrayals, in losses that have no comparison to most of what any person faces in an entire lifetime. And still, every day, the practice, the journal, the reflection, the deliberate work of governing what happened inside regardless of what happened outside. This episode isn't a history lesson about Marcus Aurelius. It's an immersion into how he thought, into what he practiced, into the specific tools he used to maintain calm when everything around him pushed toward the opposite, and into how those same tools, developed 2,000 years ago in the most adverse conditions possible, are available to you right now. Not so you become a philosopher, not so you abandon everything and devote yourself to contemplation so you can govern your mind in your life, with your problems, with your circumstances, with the same work Marcus Aurelius did in his The Meditations, that journal that was never meant to be published, and that is today the most widely read text of personal philosophy in the prompt world. Aren't a book of abstract wisdom. They're the honest record of a man struggling every day to be who he wanted to be, not to react when he had all the power in the world to do so, to maintain calm when the world presented him with real reasons to lose it. That man, that human being, who struggled and who sometimes failed and who returned to the journal the next day to try again, is the model for this episode. Not the perfect superhuman who never made mistakes, the man who practiced every day. Because he understood that calm isn't a state you reach, it's a practice you sustain. The phrase that accompanies you today is this: you have power over your mind, not over outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Let's begin. But before we begin, I want you to do something. Think about the last time something external took complete governance of your mind for hours. A piece of news, a comment, a situation you couldn't control, and you let it in, and it governed you for the entire day without you having chosen it. How much did that cost? In energy? In presence? In what you stopped building while your mind was occupied with something you didn't choose? If that resonates with you, if there's something you recognize in what you just heard, stop this podcast right now. Go to the comments and write this: I govern my mind. Write it. Don't think it, write it, because the difference between whoever thinks it and whoever writes it is the same difference between whoever wishes it and whoever starts building it. I govern my mind. Go, write it. And when you come back, we continue. First Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world, and yet every night he wrote in his journal about how to master his own thoughts, because he knew that governing an empire was easy compared to governing his mind. There's something external power cannot buy. No amount of wealth can buy it. No title can guarantee it. No level of influence over the outside world produces it. Inner peace, the governance of what happens inside, the ability to be completely calm when external circumstances push toward exactly the opposite. Marcus Aurelius knew this, and he knew it not as abstract philosophical theory, but as the direct personal experience of someone who had more external power than anyone in his era, and who discovered, precisely because he had it, that such power didn't solve the most difficult problem a human being can face: the governance of his own mind. Picture this scene with all the concreteness you can. It's approximately the year 170 AD. You're in a campaign tent on the north bank of the Danube River. Outside, the cold of a Central European winter night cuts to the bone. Your army has been on campaign for months. Tomorrow there will be decisions to make that will cost lives. And the news arriving from Rome isn't good. And you, the most powerful man in the known world, open a small journal and start writing to yourself. Not orders, not strategies, not reminders about what you need to do tomorrow. Reminders about who you want to be, how you want to respond when someone disappoints you, how you want to handle anger when something throws you off balance, how you want to maintain perspective when the weight of governing a world in crisis threatens to crush you. That's what Marcus Aurelius was writing in his meditations, not the journal of a powerful man reflecting on his greatness, the journal of a man who was struggling, who knew the greatest battle wasn't on the Danube frontier or in the halls of the Roman Senate. It was inside, and he knew it because he'd lived it, because he'd governed the external world with relative effectiveness for years, and had seen, with a clarity only direct experience can provide, that such governance didn't guarantee inner governance, that he could decide the fate of millions of people and not be able to fully decide how he felt when someone betrayed him, that he could move armies with an order and not be able to move with the same ease. The thoughts that appeared in his mind without having been invited, that gap, that distance between the external power he had and the inner governance he worked on every day, is exactly what his meditations record. Not the wisdom of a sage who's already reached enlightenment, the work of a man who keeps trying, page after page, night after night, on military campaign, in the palace, in moments of greatest pressure and in moments of apparent calm that could be just as difficult to fully inhabit. And why does that matter for you? Because if the most powerful man in the ancient world needed that work, if the man with more resources and more authority than virtually any human being who ever existed needed to sit down every night and deliberately work on governing his own mind, then the difficulty you experience in governing yours isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're human, that you face exactly the same challenge Marcus Aurelius faced, with less external power than he had. Yes, but with the same internal work available, the same practice, the same tools, the same journal, if you decide to use it. Because the meditations aren't just the record of the work Marcus Aurelius did, they're also the map of how to do it. And that map is available to you right now, not because you're a philosopher or because you have the time he had, but because the work it describes can be done in 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, exactly as he did it. In the campaign tent, with the Danube cold outside, with the weight of the world on his shoulders. If he could in those conditions, you can in yours. That's not empty motivation. It's the most powerful evidence that exists that governing the mind doesn't require ideal conditions. It requires the decision to practice it. In the conditions you have now. This is your assignment for this first lesson. Tonight, before going to sleep, open something where you can write. A notebook, your phone's notes app, anywhere. And write one single question and its honest answer. The question is, what governed me today? Not what you did, not what you accomplished. What governed your thoughts and reactions throughout the day? Was it you, or was it something external that entered without being invited? Just that question, just that answer. That's the beginning of the same work Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent 2,000 years ago. Do it tonight. Second Stoic lesson. The emperor faced wars, plagues, betrayals, and the death of his children. And in the midst of all that, he wrote that inner peace doesn't depend on what happens outside, but on how you govern what happens inside. Inner peace has a condition most people don't examine sufficiently. The condition we assume, almost without questioning it, is that inner peace depends on external circumstances, on things going well, on problems being solved, on the people we care about being okay, on work functioning, on the future seeming relatively predictable and manageable. And under that condition, inner peace is always provisional, always one event away from disappearing, always dependent on something we don't fully control. Marcus Aurelius spent decades proving that condition is false, not in easy conditions. In conditions that would have justified the permanent absence of inner peace in any reasonable human being. Picture this account. During his reign, the Antonine Plague killed between 5 and 10 million people. Cities were emptying, legions were weakening. At the same time, wars on multiple frontiers. Years of military campaign that took him away from Rome, from his family, from any approximation of comfort. And internally, the betrayal of Avidius Cassius, the general in whom he'd placed deep trust, who rebelled proclaiming his own authority while Marcus Aurelius was on campaign. It wasn't an unknown enemy. It was someone in whom he'd placed real trust. And on top of all that, loss. Several of his children died during his reign. A father's pain at losing a child has no scale. Marcus Aurelius lived it more than once while trying to govern the world with equanimity. Did he have inner peace amid all that? Not always. His meditations are the honest record of someone who also lost his calm, who was also disturbed, who also had days where the inner work was harder than on others. But what his meditations also record, with a consistency that's extraordinary given the context, is the practice of returning. always returning to the center, to the principles, to the understanding that inner peace didn't depend on the plague ending or the wars ceasing or the betrayal being repaired. It depended on how he governed what happened inside while all that happened outside. That, the distinction between what happens outside and how you govern what happens inside, is the most fundamental in all of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius didn't just teach it, he lived it. In conditions that make most of the problems any of us faces in everyday life seem, in perspective, considerably more manageable. That doesn't mean minimizing what you face. Your problems are real. Your pain is legitimate. The difficulties of your life deserve to be taken seriously. It means something different. It means that if inner peace didn't require the plague to end for Marcus Aurelius, it also doesn't require all your problems to be solved for you. It's available now, in the circumstances you have now, with the problems you have now, not by denying the problems, but because inner peace, as Marcus Aurelius understood and practiced it, doesn't live in external circumstances. It lives in how you govern what happens inside while external circumstances are what they are. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that captures this idea with a precision that hasn't aged a single day in 2,000 years. He wrote that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way, not as empty consolation for whoever faces difficulties, as the description of a principle that works, that the very circumstances that seem to prevent inner governance are, when correctly understood, exactly the conditions where that governance is built. Calm isn't practiced when everything's fine. It's built in exactly the moments where everything pushes toward the opposite. And every time you practice holding center in those moments, even imperfectly, you're building something real. The ability to govern your mind in the conditions you have. This is your assignment for this second lesson. Identify the most present problem in your life right now, the one consuming the most energy, and ask yourself this question: how much of what I'm experiencing around this problem comes from the situation itself, and how much comes from how I govern what I think about the situation? Not to minimize the problem, to see clearly exactly where the work is available. Do it today. There's something about this second lesson that deserves deeper development because it touches a point many people misunderstand about Stoicism. Stoicism doesn't propose that you not feel. It doesn't propose you become an insensitive stone that processes losses and betrayals and pain with the same indifference a rock receives rain. Marcus Aurelius felt deeply. The Meditations are the record of someone who feels with an intensity his words reflect throughout every page. He felt the weight of governing, felt the difficulty of relationships, felt the pain of losses, felt the frustration of betrayals, felt exactly what any human being feels when circumstances produce those emotions. What he didn't do was let himself be completely governed by those emotions. That's the distinction, not the absence of. Emotion. The governance of the response to the emotion. The emotion arrives. It's real. It's legitimate. It's not suppressed, not denied, not pretended away. But between the emotion and the response to that emotion, there's a space, an instant. The same space we examined in the second episode of this series. And in that space, Marcus Aurelius chose how to respond. Not always perfectly. Not always with the equanimity his principles aspired to. but always with the intention to choose, to not simply follow the impulse of the emotion without any mediation. That's what his meditations trained. Not the elimination of emotions, the ability to make that space between emotion and response large enough that there's time to choose. And that ability, that expanded space between emotion and response, is exactly what Marcus Aurelius's inner peace produced in practice. Not the peace of someone who feels nothing, the peace of someone who feels everything and chooses how to respond. That distinction completely changes how you see the model. You don't have to stop feeling in order to govern your mind like Marcus Aurelius. You have to build that space where choice is possible, and that space is built exactly the way he built it, with deliberate practice, every day, in the conditions you have. Now, third Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts, and you've been letting any circumstance paint your mind whatever colors it pleases. There's an image Marcus Aurelius left in his meditations that has been the most precise description of how the mind works when it isn't governed for 2,000 years. The soul takes on the color of its thoughts. It's not poetry. It's a functional description of something anyone can verify in their own experience. What you habitually think colors how you experience everything else. If you habitually think from fear, you see threats where there may be none. If you habitually think from anger, you find provocations where there may have been no intention to provoke. If you habitually think from anxiety, every piece of uncertainty becomes evidence that disaster is imminent. The color of habitual thoughts tints the experience of reality. It doesn't completely determine it. Reality remains what it is, but the experience of that reality, the way you process it, the interpretation you give it, the weight you feel when you engage with it, all of that depends enormously on the color your habitual thoughts carry. Marcus Aurelius understood this from a perspective that gave him unique clarity on the subject. As a ruler, making decisions affecting millions, the quality of his perception of reality had direct, verifiable consequences. He couldn't afford to let his thoughts color reality with hues that didn't correspond to what was really there. If fear colored his perceptions, he'd make decisions based on threats that didn't exist at the magnitude fear gave them. If anger colored his perceptions, he'd make decisions from emotional impulse rather than clear judgment. If despair colored his perceptions during the plague or the wars, he'd lose the ability to see the options available within genuinely difficult circumstances. And that's why the work of governing the color of his thoughts wasn't a spiritual exercise separate from his governing function. It was a fundamental part of his governing function. The quality of his decisions depended on the quality of his perception, and the quality of his perception depended on the color of his habitual thoughts. Now, apply this to your life. What color are your habitual thoughts? When you wake up in the morning, before the day begins, what's the first thing that enters your mind? Worry, resistance, heaviness about what's coming, or the possibility of what the day could be? When you encounter an obstacle, what's the first color that appears? Frustration, resentment, or curiosity about how to navigate it? When someone does something you don't like, what color tints your interpretation of their motives? Assumed malice, or the possibility that there's something you're not fully seeing? Those habitual colors are the result of what you've allowed to enter your mind without examining it. of the thought patterns that have established themselves through years of repetition until they've become automatic. You didn't consciously choose most of them, but you can choose to change them, exactly as Marcus Aurelius did in his meditations, identifying the color thoughts were taking in a specific moment, examining whether that color corresponded to reality or was an addition the mind was making to reality, and deliberately choosing a different perspective, not in a forced way, not denying what exists, but by directing attention toward what also exists, and that habitual thoughts of a certain color tend to make invisible. This is your assignment for this third lesson. Today, when you notice your mind is taking on a particular color, when you notice an emotional state coloring how you're experiencing what's in front of you, ask yourself this question: is this color my mind sees the color of reality, or a color my mind is adding to reality? Not to change the color immediately, just to see it. Because the first step toward governing the color of your thoughts is noticing it has a color, and that color doesn't always correspond precisely to what's really there. Do it today. There's more about this third lesson that deserves to be said, because without it, an important confusion can arise. The distinction between the Stoic governance of thought color and superficial positive thinking is fundamental. Superficial positive thinking says, ignore real problems and focus on the good, deny difficulty, paint reality in colors that don't correspond to what's there. Stoic governance of thoughts says exactly the opposite. See reality as it is, without the negative embellishments the anxious or angry or fearful mind adds, but also without the positive embellishments self-deception produces. Reality as it is, neither darker than it is, nor brighter than it is. Marcus Aurelius practiced this with a discipline. His meditations document when something difficult happened, he didn't artificially minimize it. He asked a different question: how much of what I'm experiencing corresponds to what's really there, and how much is what my mind is adding to what's there? And that question, asked honestly, frequently revealed that the present reality, seen without the embellishments the mind had added, was more manageable than it seemed from inside the thoughts that colored it. Not always easy, not always without pain, but more manageable. And that greater manageability, produced by seeing reality with more precision, is what governing the color of thoughts produces in practice, not the elimination of problems, the possibility of facing them with more clarity and more effectiveness. Seneca, who from exile observed this process in himself with brutal honesty, articulated it in a way that completes what Marcus Aurelius taught. He wrote that the wise man doesn't deny pain. He experiences it fully, but he doesn't amplify it with the embellishments the mind adds. He doesn't add imagined suffering to real suffering, doesn't add the fear of what might be added to the pain that already exists, only the real pain, without embellishments. And that difference between real pain plus all the embellishments the mind adds is frequently the difference between what's difficult but navigable and what seems insurmountable. Governing the color of thoughts doesn't make everything good. It makes reality seen with more precision. And reality seen with more precision is always more manageable than reality amplified by thoughts adding colors that don't belong to it. That's what the first 3 lessons of this episode build together. The first says, governing the mind is the most difficult and important work, and it requires deliberate, constant practice. The second says, Inner peace doesn't depend on external circumstances. It depends on how you govern what happens inside. The third says, what you habitually think colors how you experience everything. And you can learn to govern that color with more precision. Together they build the foundation for everything that follows. The governance of the mind available now, in the circumstances you have, without waiting for ideal conditions that aren't going to come, exactly as Marcus Aurelius practiced it in the campaign tent, with the cold outside and the work inside, every day. There's more that these first 3 lessons reveal. When seen together, that's fundamental for understanding the work this episode proposes. Marcus Aurelius didn't practice governing his mind because he had ideal conditions for it. He practiced it exactly because he didn't. His meditations show someone who struggled with the same obstacles you face: impatience, irritation, the feeling that there's too much to do and too little time, moments where impulse was stronger than principle, nights where fatigue made the work of reflection harder. All of that is in his meditations, not disguised, documented with honesty. Because Marcus Aurelius understood something this episode tries to transmit with the same honesty. The difficulty of the work isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing it. The mind that has no resistance isn't a mind that's completely governed. It's a mind that isn't being worked on. The resistance, the impulse pushing toward reaction when you chose response, the thought returning to the dark color when you chose a different one, the judgment appearing before you can examine it. All of that is exactly what the work has to work on, not the absence of work, the work itself. And every time you notice that resistance and choose to continue with the practice anyway, you're building something that has no other path of construction. The ability to govern the mind when the mind doesn't want to be governed. Marcus Aurelius built it over decades. You can start building it this week with the 3 tasks from the first 3 lessons. Tonight's question: what governed me today? Tomorrow's question: what thoughts am I going to allow? And the observation throughout the day: what color is my mind taking right now? Is it the color of reality or a color my mind is adding? 3 questions, 1 week. The beginning of the system, the beginning of governing the mind, as Marcus Aurelius practiced it, in the conditions he had, with the problems he had, with the same work available to you. Now, before closing the first block, there's something about the first lesson that deserves development because it reveals something fundamental about the nature of the work we're describing. Marcus Aurelius didn't start his meditations as a man who already knew how to govern his mind. He started them as a man who was learning to do it. And that difference between someone who already knows and someone who's learning is exactly the difference that makes it possible for this work to be yours too. Because if Marcus Aurelius had already known from the beginning, his meditations wouldn't be what they are. They'd be an instruction manual written by someone who's already mastered the subject, transmitting it from the master's position to the student. But that's not what they are. They're the workbook of someone who's practicing, who makes mistakes, who notes them, who tries again, who one day writes that he lost his calm with an official and the next day writes that he wants to respond differently next time, who 1 week documents a principle with clarity and the following week documents that he forgot that principle exactly when he needed it most. That's the real Marcus Aurelius of the meditations, not the perfect philosopher, the imperfect practitioner who keeps practicing, and that Marcus Aurelius, the one who struggles and fails and returns, is much more useful to you than the perfect philosopher who never needed to practice, because he shows you that the work doesn't require perfection to produce results. It requires persistence. It requires the commitment to return after every failure. To ask the question again tomorrow, even though you asked it yesterday and it didn't work perfectly. To prepare the morning, even though yesterday's preparation wasn't enough for the difficulty that arrived. To examine the judgment, even though yesterday's examination produced only part of the clarity sought. Persistence, the constant return to practice, regardless of how many times it's failed, is what Marcus Aurelius documented in his Meditations. And it's what produced the character his contemporaries documented in him. Not the perfection of someone who never fails, the persistence of someone who always returns. That's available to you. Tonight, when you ask the 3 questions from the 9th lesson, don't look for perfect answers, look for honest ones. And tomorrow morning, when you ask the question from the 10th lesson, don't look for perfect readiness, look for honest readiness. That's enough to start. And starting is exactly what Marcus Aurelius would do in your place, what he did in his tonight, with the work he had available, which was exactly the same work you have available now. The journal, the questions, the honesty. That's all. 4th Stoic lesson. The emperor's secret wasn't avoiding problems, but training his mind every day so that problems didn't govern him. And that training is available to you right now. There's an illusion most people chase for years without recognizing it as an illusion. The illusion that the goal is to eliminate problems. That if you could solve this problem, if this difficult situation would resolve itself, if this person would stop behaving that way, if these circumstances would change, then you could finally be at peace. Marcus Aurelius knew that doesn't work that way, not because he was cynical, because he had the power to solve more problems than virtually anyone who's ever existed. And he solved them. And new problems arrived. And the equanimity he sought didn't depend on problems being solved. It depended on something completely different. On training the mind to respond to problems in a way that didn't leave it governed by them. That distinction is the most important of all those this episode offers. Not the goal of eliminating problems, the goal of training yourself so that problems don't eliminate you. Picture this scene. Marcus Aurelius has been governing the greatest empire in the known world for years. He's solved problems that would have toppled most leaders in history. He's managed wars, pandemics, betrayals, economic crises, devastating personal losses. And every morning when he wakes up, new problems are waiting. Not because he's a bad governor, because governing constantly produces problems. Life constantly produces problems. There's no level of competence or power or resources that eliminates the continuous production of problems. And what does Marcus Aurelius do about that? He doesn't seek the moment where there will finally be no more problems. He trains to respond better to the ones that come every day. In the Meditations, a practice that appears repeatedly is mental preparation for difficulty. Marcus Aurelius would tell himself, every morning, something like this: today I will encounter difficult people, obstacles I didn't anticipate, frustrations that will arise when I least expect them, situations that will test my patience and my equanimity, and that's fine because I'm trained for that. That anticipatory preparation wasn't pessimism. It was the disposition of an athlete who's prepared for competition, who doesn't expect there to be no opponents or for the match to be easy. Who has trained to respond effectively to whatever the competition presents? Marcus Aurelius's training was that. Not physical training, though he valued that too. Training the mind to respond to problems with less reactivity, more clarity, the ability to hold center while the world pushes from every angle. And that training didn't require special conditions. It required daily practice, the journal, the reflection, the questions he asked himself about how he'd responded to what the day had brought, the anticipation of what the next day might bring. That's what the meditations record, not the wisdom of a man who has everything figured out, the record of the training of a man who keeps working every day. And how does that training apply in your life? You don't have to govern an empire, but you have your problems, your difficult circumstances, your complicated people, your recurring obstacles. The situations that appear again and again, and that every time they appear test your ability to respond instead of simply react. Marcus Aurelius's training, applied to those situations of yours, has the same structure, not waiting for problems to disappear, training yourself to respond to them better every day, with the practice you have available now. This is your assignment for this fourth lesson. Identify the type of problem or situation that most frequently tests your ability to stay centered, not necessarily the most serious one, the most frequent. And this week, every time that type of situation appears, instead of simply reacting as you always do, ask yourself Marcus Aurelius's question: am I responding or am I being governed? Just that question. You don't have to have perfect behavior. Just ask yourself the question, because the question alone is already the training. Do it this week. Fifth Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius began every day by anticipating that he would encounter difficult people, obstacles, and frustrations, not to embitter himself, but so that nothing would catch him off guard or steal his calm. There's something surprise does to calm that anticipation cannot do. It topples it. When something difficult arrives without our having anticipated it, the reaction arrives before there's been time to choose. The nervous system responds before the conscious mind has had a chance to participate. And what responds isn't always the best version of ourselves. Marcus Aurelius knew this, and he developed a practice that addressed exactly that problem. Before the day began, before the difficult people and the obstacles and the frustrations arrived, he prepared for them to arrive, not with pessimism, not with the attitude of someone who expects everything to go wrong, with the mindset of someone who trains, the athlete who visualizes the match before playing it, who anticipates the opponent's moves, who prepares responses for difficult scenarios before they arrive, not because they expect everything to go wrong, because they know some difficult things are going to come regardless, and that being prepared makes their response completely different from when they come as a surprise. Marcus Aurelius described this practice in his meditations with a frankness that's almost startling. He wrote that in the morning he would tell himself that day he would encounter people who would be intrusive, ungrateful, arrogant, disloyal, ill-intentioned, and that those people were that way because they were ignorant of good and evil, and that none of that could truly harm him because nobody could force him to share their errors. That's Marcus Aurelius's morning preparation, not a positive visualization ritual for the best possible scenario. The honest acceptance that the day is going to bring difficulties, and the anticipatory decision that none of those things is going to steal his calm, because calm doesn't depend on those things not coming, It depends on being prepared for when they come. That preparation completely changes the experience. Think about the difference between receiving bad news when you were expecting it versus receiving it completely by surprise. When you expect it, something is already built to receive it. The response has more room to be chosen because the impact of surprise doesn't catch it completely unarmed. When it arrives by surprise, the impact occupies all available space, and the response that comes is frequently the nervous system's automatic reaction rather than the chosen response. Marcus Aurelius eliminated surprise from his days, not difficulties, surprises, and that preparation, that honest anticipation of difficulty before it arrives, gave him the advantage of being able to respond instead of simply react. There's something important to add about this practice. It's not only the anticipation of difficulties, it's also the affirmation made in the morning calm before the day starts pushing of how you want to respond when they arrive. Marcus Aurelius didn't just tell himself he'd encounter difficult people. He reminded himself how he wanted to respond to those people, from what principles, with what quality of attention, with what level of equanimity. That dual practice, anticipating difficulty and affirming the desired response, is exactly what built the character Marcus Aurelius had, not spontaneously, with the deliberate work of every day. This is your assignment for this 5th lesson. Tomorrow morning, before the day begins, dedicate 3 minutes to this practice. First, honestly anticipate what kind of difficulties the day might bring. Not catastrophically, just realistically. The difficult conversations that might occur. The friction situations that will probably appear. Second, decide, in the calm of that moment, how you want to respond to those difficulties, from what place you want to respond. From calm or from reaction, from choice or from impulse. 3 minutes. Tomorrow morning, observe whether the day unfolds differently when you start it this way, with the preparation Marcus Aurelius used in his campaign tent on the Danube frontier. The calm that doesn't depend on the day being easy. The calm that comes from being prepared for it not to be. 6th Stoic lesson. The emperor wrote that you have power over your mind and not over outside events. And when you understand this, you'll find the strength you've been searching for your whole life in the wrong places. This is perhaps the most well-known quote from all of Marcus Aurelius's meditations. You have power over your mind, not over outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And its popularity isn't accidental, because it touches something virtually every human being experiences at some point in their life, with the intensity of a deep recognition, the feeling of having searched for strength in the wrong place. Where do most people look for strength? In external circumstances, in things working the way they want, in people behaving as they expect, in work delivering the results they seek, in health holding up. And that search for strength in external circumstances produces exactly the experience of someone searching in the wrong place, constant frustration. Because external circumstances don't cooperate with the regularity and consistency that strength based on them would need to hold. Marcus Aurelius lived this in the most extreme way possible. He had more power over external circumstances than virtually any human being who's ever existed. He could move armies, change laws, reconfigure the map of the known world, and he discovered that power, as enormous as it was, didn't give him the strength he sought. Real strength was somewhere else, it was in the governance of his own mind. And that governance was always available, regardless of what external circumstances were producing, regardless of whether the plague was advancing or retreating, whether the wars were going well or poorly, whether his children lived or died. The strength that came from governing his mind was a strength external circumstances couldn't take away, because it didn't depend on them. That's what this quote, in its deceptive simplicity, is saying. That real strength, the kind that can't be taken away by external circumstances, lives in governing your own mind. Not in things going well, not in people behaving as you expect, in governing how you respond to what the world presents. That governance is the only power nobody can take from you. Circumstances can change, people can disappoint you, plans can fail. The world can present exactly the opposite of what you expected. And the strength that comes from governing your mind remains available regardless, because it doesn't depend on any of those things to exist. This is your assignment for this 6th lesson. Identify an area of your life where you're seeking strength or stability in something external, a result you're expecting, a person you wish would behave differently, a circumstance you wish were different, and ask yourself this question: if that never changed, if circumstances remained exactly as they are now, where is the strength available? Not as resignation before what you can't change, as the identification of the source of strength that doesn't depend on it changing. That source exists, the same one Marcus Aurelius found in his campaign tent with the world pushing from every angle. The governance of his own mind, it's available to you too, right now. There's something about lessons 4, 5, and 6 together that connects all three in a way that makes Marcus Aurelius's system more visible. All three speak of the same work from 3 angles. The 4th says, train the mind to respond. Don't wait for problems to disappear. The 5th says, anticipate difficulty before it arrives, so it doesn't catch you unprepared. The 6th says, strength is in governing your mind, not in external circumstances. Together, they build something none of the 3 can build alone. The practical foundation of Marcus Aurelius's system. The training the 4th gives needs the objective the 6th gives. You know what you're training for, to find strength where it truly lives. The preparation the 5th gives needs the training the 4th gives. It's not enough to anticipate if you haven't trained the response you want to have. And the strength the 6th gives is built exactly with the training and preparation of the other 2. They're inseparable, and together they produce what Marcus Aurelius built over decades: the trained, prepared mind, anchored in the correct source of strength. Not perfect, not without setbacks, but real, verifiable, built on the practice of every day. This week, all 3 practices together. The training from the 4th. Asking yourself whether you're responding or being governed when the type of difficult situation you identified arrives. The preparation from the 5th. 3 minutes every morning anticipating the day's difficulties and affirming how you want to respond. And the search from the 6th. Identifying which areas of your life you're seeking strength in the wrong place and redirecting that search toward governing your mind. 3 practices, 1 week. The same work Marcus Aurelius did, in the conditions he had, with the problems he had, available to you, in the conditions you have. Now, 7th Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that things don't have the power to disturb us that we are the ones who give them that power with our judgments and reactions. This lesson is the hardest to accept emotionally, though it's the most verifiable intellectually. Because when something disturbs us, the immediate, irresistible feeling is that the disturbance comes from what happened, that the event, the person, the circumstance is what disturbed us. And there's enough truth in that for Marcus Aurelius's idea that we are the ones who give them the power to disturb, to seem at first glance like a denial of reality, but it isn't. What Marcus Aurelius describes is something more precise than denying the impact of external events. He describes the existence of a step between the event and the disturbance, a step most people don't notice because it happens too quickly, the step of judgment between what happens and the disturbance. You feel there's an evaluation, an interpretation, a judgment about what that event means, whether it's a threat, whether it's an injustice, whether it violates something you value. That judgment is what produces the disturbance, not the event itself. Epictetus demonstrated this with an example that has been irrefutable for 20 centuries. If someone insults you in a language you don't understand, does it disturb you? No. The event is identical. The words, the tone, the intention, everything identical. But without the judgment, without the interpretation that what happened is an insult that violates something important, the disturbance doesn't occur. The judgment is the step that produces the disturbance, and that judgment is in you. It was always in you. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this constantly in his meditations precisely because it's the easiest thing to forget when disturbance arrives with sufficient intensity. He told himself, "Things don't have the power to disturb you. You are the one who gives them that power with the judgment you make about them, not as an abstract affirmation, as a practical reminder of the mechanism producing the disturbance." And that reminder gave him something most people don't have in the moment of disturbance: a lever. If the disturbance came directly from the event, there would be nothing to do. The event happened, the disturbance follows. No lever available. But if the disturbance comes from the judgment about the event, there's something that can be examined, something that can be questioned, something over which the governance of the mind can be exercised. The judgment. Is this judgment the most accurate possible? Does what I'm interpreting correspond to what really happened? Am I adding something to what happened that the event itself didn't contain? Those questions, asked in the moment of disturbance, are the practice of mind governance in action. Not easy, not quick, not perfect, but available. This is your assignment for this 7th lesson. The next time something disturbs you, when you notice something external has taken control of your internal state, ask yourself this question before responding: what judgment am I making about what happened that produces this disturbance? Not to necessarily eliminate the judgment. The judgment isn't always wrong. To see it, to recognize it exists, that there's a step between the event and the disturbance that's yours. That in that step lies the possibility of governance. Do it today with the next disturbance that arrives. 8th Stoic lesson. The emperor practiced seeing things as they really are, without the embellishments the mind adds, because he knew that most suffering comes from what we add to reality and not from reality itself. Marcus Aurelius had a practice that may seem strange when you first hear it. When something disturbed him, he described it in completely literal terms, without metaphors, without evaluations, without the value-laden language we normally use to describe things. If someone had disappointed him, he didn't describe it as a devastating betrayal that altered everything. He described it as a person who acted a certain way in a certain situation. If he lost something he valued, he didn't describe it as the loss of what made his life meaningful. He described it as the absence of a thing that was there before and isn't now. This practice has a name in studies of the meditations: seeing things as they really are, without the embellishments. And the purpose wasn't to minimize what happened. It was to see the difference between what really happened and what the mind added to what happened. Because that difference, that gap, between the bare event and the narrative the mind built around it, is frequently where most of the suffering lives. Seneca articulated it in a way that perfectly complements what Marcus Aurelius practiced. He wrote that most people don't suffer from what happens, they suffer from what they think about what happens, and that the difference between the two, between reality and the narrative about reality, is frequently enormous. Not always. Some things are genuinely difficult without additional embellishments, but with surprising frequency, when you reduce a disturbing situation to its most literal elements without the narratives the mind builds around it, the weight of that situation reduces significantly. Not because the situation is less real, because you see more clearly how much of the weight comes from the situation itself and how much comes from the embellishments the mind added. This is your assignment for this 8th lesson. Take the situation weighing on you most right now and describe it in the most literal, most bare terms you can, without metaphors, without value-laden language. Just what literally happened or is happening. Then compare that bare description with the narrative you normally use when you think about that situation. How much does the bare description weigh? And how much does the habitual narrative weigh? The difference between the two is exactly where the mind adds something that wasn't in the original situation. And that addition, seen clearly, can be examined and can be reduced. Not always completely, not all at once, but that reduction, that greater precision in perceiving what really is versus what the mind adds, is exactly what Marcus Aurelius produced with this practice. Do it today. There's something. Lessons 7 and 8 have in common. That's worth naming directly, because it connects both with all the earlier work in this episode. Both speak of the same mechanism from different angles. The 7th says, between the event and the disturbance, there's a judgment that's yours. Examining it is the available lever. The 8th says, between reality and your experience of reality, there are embellishments the mind adds. Removing them reduces unnecessary weight. Both are ways of seeing the same thing, that what you experience is never exactly what happened. There's always a layer of interpretation between the event and the experience of the event. And that layer, that interpretation process that happens so quickly, it seems part of the event itself, is where the governance of the mind has its most direct lever. Not in changing events, in examining the interpretation. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in both forms simultaneously. He examined the judgment producing the disturbance, and then saw the situation in its most literal terms to separate what had really happened from what his mind had added. Those two practices together produced a clarity about reality that neither could produce alone. The clarity of judgment and the clarity of perception. Together, they build the governance of the mind in its most concrete and most applicable form available to you. In the next disturbance that arrives, with the question from the 7th lesson, what judgment am I making that produces this disturbance? And with the practice from the 8th, how would I describe this in its most literal terms, without the embellishments my mind is adding? 2 questions, 1 disturbance. The most direct lever available for governing the mind. Use them today with whatever comes. There's something this block needs to add about the 8 lessons together before closing. The 8 lessons are 8 tools of the same system. But there's something none of them says on its own with sufficient clarity that the complete system does say. The tools don't work in isolation. The morning preparation from the 5th lesson doesn't fully work without the training from the 4th, because anticipating difficulty without having trained the response you want to have leaves you exposed to the same reactivity even if you're no longer surprised. The training from the 4th doesn't fully work without the correct source of strength from the 6th, because training without knowing what source of strength you're training for produces training that can go in the wrong direction. The examination of judgment from the 7th doesn't fully work without seeing things without embellishments from the 8th, because you can identify the judgment producing the disturbance and still see the situation amplified by the embellishments the mind adds. The 8 tools reinforce each other. That's the nature of the system, and it's exactly why Marcus Aurelius practiced all of them, not some, all, with the consistency that produced the complete system rather than isolated tools. That complete system, with its 8 tools applied consistently, is what produces the result the meditations document. Not an instant transformation, the gradual, verifiable change of someone who practices every day for weeks and months and years. That change is available to you, with the same tools, with the same consistency, in the conditions you have. Now, the inner citadel Marcus Aurelius describes in his meditations isn't a poetic metaphor. It's a concrete practice that connects all the previous tools into a single access point. The inner citadel is the place inside you can retreat to when the external world becomes particularly difficult to inhabit, not to escape reality, to face it from a more solid place. When the morning preparation wasn't enough for the difficulty that arrived, when the training confronts a trigger more intense than what was anticipated, when the examination of judgment can't happen quickly enough. In those moments, the inner citadel is the available lever, the movement inward, the deliberate pause, the instant of choice where you decide from what place you're going to respond. From the citadel, from the center you've been building, not from the periphery where external noise has more access. That movement, that deliberate retreat to the citadel before responding, is always possible. In the tensest meeting, in the most difficult conversation, in the moment where everything pushes toward automatic reaction, always possible if you decide to go there. Marcus Aurelius did it in the most heated Roman Senate, in the campaign tent with devastating news arriving from multiple fronts, in the moment of betrayal by someone he trusted, in the pain of losing his children. Always the movement toward the citadel, always the return to center before responding. That movement is available to you right now, in the next difficult situation. 1. Instant before responding. Go there, and from there, govern. That's Marcus Aurelius's system in its most essential expression, available to you with the 8 tools from the first 8 lessons, and with the 2 that come in the next block. There's more that the 8 lessons from the first 2 blocks need to say together before moving to the close. Marcus Aurelius's system isn't complicated. It's simple, deliberately simple. Because Marcus Aurelius understood something about practices that have to be sustained for years that many personal development systems don't understand. That complexity is the enemy of consistency. Complicated practices that require specific conditions and significant time and elaborate rituals are sustained while motivation is high. When motivation drops, which inevitably drops at some point, complexity becomes the perfect reason to abandon them. Simple practices that fit into real life are sustained because there isn't enough friction for a lack of motivation to completely interrupt them. Marcus Aurelius designed his practice so it could be sustained in the most adverse conditions. On military campaign, with the Danube cold outside, with urgent decisions waiting from early morning, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, if the practice had required special conditions, it wouldn't have survived the reality of his life. It survived because it was simple. The journal, the questions, the honest observation of the day, and the morning preparation, which wasn't an hour-long ritual. It was the 3-minute decision of from where he wanted to respond to the coming day. That simplicity, maintained with the consistency produced by the absence of friction, is what generates the extraordinary result the meditations document. Not a dramatic 1-week transformation, the gradual, verifiable change of someone who practices every day for years. That change is available to you, with the same simplicity, with the same consistency, in the conditions you have. The 8 tools from the first 8 lessons, applied with that simple consistency, produce exactly that. Not the perfection of the system, the beginning of the system, and the beginning of the system, sustained with consistency, produces over time exactly what Marcus Aurelius built, a character available to you. Starting this morning, with the question from the 5th lesson, the morning preparation. What kind of difficulties might today bring? From what place do I want to respond to them? 3 minutes, this morning. That's the beginning of the system. 9th Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not to publish them, but to govern himself. And those private writings became the most powerful mental strength manual in history. There's something about Marcus Aurelius's meditations that makes them radically different from any other philosophical or personal development text that exists. They weren't written for you. They weren't written for anyone. They were written by Marcus Aurelius, for Marcus Aurelius, as reminders, as anchors, as the daily work of someone who wanted to be who he wanted to be, and who knew that without that written work, without that deliberate effort of putting himself in front of a mirror on paper, the mind's natural tendency toward reaction and forgetting principles would drag him in a direction he hadn't chosen. That's what makes the meditations extraordinary. Not that a brilliant philosopher wrote wisdom for others to learn. That a man who was struggling wrote for himself the things he needed to remember. To not forget who he wanted to be. To keep principles alive in daily practice rather than letting them be just ideas he knew intellectually, but that didn't fully inhabit his behavior. Picture this scene. Marcus Aurelius has had a difficult day. It's not hard to imagine which of all the days in his reign it might have been. Bad news from multiple fronts. Decisions he had to make with incomplete information and enormous consequences. People who disappointed him. Moments where his own equanimity failed him. And that night, instead of simply going to sleep and hoping tomorrow would be better without doing anything active to make it so, he opens the journal and starts writing to himself, not about the day's events, about who he wanted to be in the day's events and where he'd succeeded and where he hadn't, about which principle he'd forgotten in the moment he needed it most, about how he wanted to respond tomorrow to similar situations. That process, that nightly review of the governance of his own mind, is what the meditations record, not the wisdom of someone who's already arrived, the work of someone who's still on the way. And that's what makes those texts, written 2,000 years ago for no one to read, the most widely read mental strength manual in the world today. Because they're completely honest. They don't pretend the work is easy, don't pretend it always goes well, don't construct the image of a sage who's already reached enlightenment. They're the record of the work itself, with its real difficulties, with its moments of setback, with the honesty of someone who knows he'll fail again, and who writes precisely to reduce the frequency and magnitude of those failures. That's what your own meditations, if you decide to have them, can be for you. Not the record of your perfection, the record of your work, the tool that helps you keep alive the principles you want governing your behavior. The mirror where you look every night to see clearly where you were completely yourself and where automatic reaction governed you without your having chosen it. That record, maintained with honesty over weeks and months and years, produces something no amount of reading or occasional reflection can produce. The visibility of your patterns, the moments where you always lose center, the people who always activate you, the situations that always produce the reaction you didn't choose, the principles you always forget exactly when you need them most. That visibility, accumulated in the honest record of your own work, is the most precise map that exists of the work ahead of you. Not because someone else identified it, because you yourself see it with your own eyes in the record of your own days. Marcus Aurelius built that map over decades. His was full of wars and plagues and betrayals and losses. Yours will be full of your conversations and your decisions and your reactions and your moments of clarity and your moments of darkness. Both are equally valid. Both are equally the work. This is your assignment for this 9th lesson. Start tonight. Open something where you can write. A physical notebook is better than the phone because the act of writing by hand has a quality of deliberation that the keyboard doesn't produce in the same way. But anywhere you can write honestly will do. And write the answers to these 3 questions. First, what governed me today? Was it me who governed my responses, or was it something external? Second, in what specific moment did I lose center? What produced it? How did I respond? Third, how do I want to respond tomorrow to similar situations? 3 questions, 5 minutes. Tonight, not to produce the perfect text, to start the record. Because the record that starts tonight, however clumsy and imperfect, is the beginning of the same work Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent, the work that will produce, with time and consistency, the most valuable map you can have of governing your own mind. Start it tonight. 10th Stoic lesson. Today you're going to start governing your mind like the emperor. Every morning you'll ask yourself what thoughts you'll allow, and every night you'll review which ones governed you. This is the lesson that closes the circle. The 9 previous lessons built the understanding. This lesson converts that understanding into practice, not the theoretical practice of someone who read about how to govern the mind, the real practice of someone who starts doing it today. with the tools they have, in the circumstances they have, exactly as Marcus Aurelius did in his. The practice has two moments, one in the morning, one at night. The morning moment is the preparation. Before the day begins, before the phone, work, news, and people start pushing, there's an instant of possible governance. In that instant, Marcus Aurelius asked himself a question this episode proposes as your daily practice. What thoughts am I going to allow today? Not in the sense of completely controlling every thought that appears. The mind produces thoughts with an autonomy that has no off switch, in the sense of deciding from what disposition you want to respond to what the day brings, from calm or from reactivity, from clarity or from the noise of habitual thoughts, from the principles you want governing your behavior, or from the impulses that appear without your having chosen them. That decision, made in the morning before the day starts pushing, doesn't guarantee everything will unfold as you want, but it gives your mind an anchor, a reminder of who you want to be before the day's circumstances start deciding for you. The night moment is the review. After the day has ended, after everything that was going to happen has happened, there's another instant of possible governance. In that instant, Marcus Aurelius asked himself other questions. What thoughts governed me today? In what moments was I who I wanted to be, and in what moments was I governed by something I hadn't chosen? Where did I lose center? Why? How do I want to respond tomorrow to similar situations? That nightly review has a purpose that goes beyond self-examination. It produces the visibility of patterns. When you review every night what governed you during the day, over time you start to see, with a clarity, no occasional reflection can produce what your recurring triggers are. What type of situations always produce the reaction you didn't choose? What principles you always forget exactly when you need them most? That visibility is the most precise map of the work ahead of you. Not a map someone else built, the one you build yourself with the honest record of your own days. And that map, accumulated over weeks and months and years of consistent practice, produces something that can't be produced any other way. The real governance of your own mind, not perfect, not permanent, not without setbacks, but real, verifiable, built on the evidence of what you've practiced. Marcus Aurelius built that governance over decades, in the most adverse conditions we can imagine, with the weight of the world on his shoulders and the Danube cold outside. And the journal, always the work, every day. Not because it was easy, because he understood it was the only work that produced what he sought, the governance of his own mind, the only fortress external circumstances couldn't destroy. This is your assignment for this 10th lesson. 2 questions, every day, without exception. In the morning, before the day begins, what thoughts am I going to allow today? At night, before sleep, what thoughts governed me? That's all. It doesn't require more time than Marcus Aurelius devoted in his campaign tent. It requires the decision to do it. Every day, starting tomorrow morning. There's something about lessons 9 and 10 together that neither fully says on its own. The 9th talks about the meditations as a practice of recording and governance. The 10th talks about the 2 questions as the structure of that practice. Together, they say, this: governing the mind requires a ritual, not a ritual in the ceremonial sense. A ritual in the sense of a practice repeated with enough consistency to become the habit that structures the mind's relationship with itself. Marcus Aurelius had his ritual, the journal, the writing, the questions he asked himself, the honesty of seeing clearly where he'd been, who he wanted to be, and where he'd failed. That ritual, practiced every day for decades, produced something no occasional reflection could have produced. The mind habituated to deliberate governance, a mind that, with time and consistent practice, starts doing the work more automatically. That starts noticing triggers before they produce the full reaction. That starts examining judgment more quickly. That starts finding the inner citadel with less effort. That's what the daily ritual produces, not from one week to the next. With the time and consistency any real habit requires to establish itself deeply, and that time, that consistency, requires exactly the simplicity the two questions represent. Because what can be done every day gets done, and what gets done every day produces the result that occasional practice can never produce. The character of the man who governs his mind, not because he reached a state of perfection, because he practices every day without exception, exactly as Marcus Aurelius did, in the conditions he had, with the time he had, with the effort that was worth it. You have the conditions you have, and the effort that's worth it. 2 questions in the morning and 3 questions at night is completely within what your real life can sustain. Marcus Aurelius's ritual, adapted to your life, is that simplicity, that consistency, that effort available to you right now. There's more about the ritual that deserves to be said with honesty. Marcus Aurelius failed many times. His meditations are the honest record of someone who also lost center, who also reacted when he wanted to respond, who also forgot principles exactly in the moment he needed them most. The difference between him and someone who doesn't practice isn't that he never failed. It's that when he failed, he returned. He always returned. To the journal, to the questions, to the work, the next day, the next morning, the next available moment of calm. He always returned. And that return, that inability to surrender to failure, is what produces character over time, not the perfection of someone who never fails, the consistency of someone who always returns. When you fail, and you will, because that's part of the process, and not a sign, the work isn't functioning. Return to the journal, to the questions, to the practice, exactly as Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent after days when everything had gone exactly as he didn't want it to. He always returned. You can return too, always, regardless of how many times you've left. Seneca wrote it with his characteristic directness. To err is human. To persist in error is a choice. Failing in governing the mind is human. Returning is a choice. Make it tomorrow morning. With Marcus Aurelius's question, what thoughts am I going to allow today? Before continuing with the closing block, there's something about all 10 lessons of this episode seen together that deserves to be named. The 10 lessons are 10 tools of the same system. The first, governing the mind is the most difficult and important work. It requires deliberate, constant practice. The second, inner peace doesn't depend on external circumstances. It depends on how you govern what happens inside. The third, the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. That color can be governed with more precision than we've been using. The fourth, train the mind to respond. Don't wait for problems to disappear. The fifth, anticipate difficulty before it arrives. so it doesn't catch you unprepared. The sixth, strength is in governing your mind, not in external circumstances. The seventh, things don't have the power to disturb us. We are the ones who give them that power with our judgments. The eighth, see things as they really are, without the embellishments the mind adds. The ninth, the meditations were Marcus Aurelius's governance ritual. Your own meditations can be yours. The 10th, 2 questions every day. What thoughts you'll allow in the morning, and which ones governed you at night. 10 tools, 1 system. The system Marcus Aurelius used to govern his mind while governing the world. And that system, complete now in these 10 lessons, is available to you, not because you're a philosopher, not because you have special conditions, because you have exactly what's needed to practice it. A journal, 2 questions, and the decision to starting tomorrow morning, with the simplest question that exists: what thoughts am I going to allow today? There's more about the practice of the 2 questions that needs to be said for it to be completely useful. The morning question, what thoughts am I going to allow today, has a characteristic that may seem obvious, but in practice requires deliberate attention. It's not a question you answer once in the morning and then forget during the day. It's an anchor, a reminder that can be activated during the day when circumstances push toward forgetting what you chose in the morning. Marcus Aurelius didn't just ask the question in the morning, he returned to it during the day. In moments of greatest pressure, when the color of his thoughts started shifting towards something he hadn't chosen, when automatic judgment threatened to produce disturbance before there was time to examine it. In those moments, the morning question functioned as the path back to the citadel. What did I choose to allow this morning? Am I being who I chose to be, or am I being governed by something I didn't choose? Those questions, activated during the day in the moments that need them most, are exactly what morning preparation makes possible. Without morning preparation, there's no anchor to return to. With it, the return to center always has a known direction. And the night question, which ones governed me, has its own aspect that requires attention. It's not a question to judge yourself. It's a question to learn. The difference is fundamental. When the nightly review becomes a judgment on your day's failures, it loses its function. It produces guilt instead of information. And guilt, unlike information, doesn't improve the next day's practice. It only makes the practice harder to sustain because it becomes associated with a negative emotional state. When the nightly review stays as an honest but neutral evaluation of what happened, it produces information. What governed me? In what moment? Why? What can I do differently tomorrow? Those questions produce information, and information is the system's fuel. The material from which Marcus Aurelius built the next day's practice from the review of the day that ended. Not destructive. Self-criticism. Honest observation in service of learning. That's the quality of attention the nightly review requires. And that quality, maintained with consistency over weeks and months, produces exactly what Marcus Aurelius's system produced. The visibility of patterns, the map of the work ahead of you, built with your own data, in your own life, with your own triggers and your own moments of clarity and your own blind spots. That map is more valuable than anything someone else can tell you about how to govern your mind, because it's yours, specific to your life, built night after night with the same work Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent. Start it tonight, with honesty, with curiosity instead of judgment, with the intention to learn instead of to condemn yourself. That's the quality of attention the work requires, and that quality, sustained over time, produces the real governance of the mind. Not perfect governance, real governance, available to you, starting tonight with the most honest question you can ask yourself: what governed me today? Before closing this block, there's something about lessons 9 and 10 that connects with the entire arc of the series. This is the 7th of 12 episodes of Master Your Mind. The first 4 episodes worked on the awakening. They showed you the emotional forces operating on you with more power than you probably recognized. Reactivity, anger, fear, anxiety. Episodes 5 and 6 began the practical tools. Recovering the present against anxiety. Strategic silence as the first external demonstration of the internal work. And this 7th episode, Marcus Aurelius's, takes the deepest step of all. Not a tool for a specific situation, the complete system for governing the mind. The framework within which all previous tools gain greater effectiveness. Because now, you don't just have strategic silence, you have the morning preparation that puts you in position to use it before the situation arrives. You don't just have the space between stimulus and response from the 2nd episode, you have the nightly review that shows you where that space closes and how to widen it. You don't just have the work with anger and fear and anxiety from episodes 3, 4, and 5. You have the system that gives you visibility over when those emotions operate, how they operate, and what activates them in your specific life. Marcus Aurelius's system integrates everything that came before, and lessons 9 and 10, the journal, and the 2 questions are the mechanism that activates that. Integration in daily practice, not theoretically, concretely and verifiably, with the record of your own days, with the information from your own patterns, with the map you build yourself about the specific work ahead of you. That's what the practice of the 2 questions produces when sustained with the consistency it requires. Not in a week, in the months that follow this week. When the record starts revealing patterns occasional practice can't see, when the morning preparation starts making the anticipation of difficulties more precise, when the nightly review starts producing adjustments to the next day's work that accumulate gradually, the change this episode describes. That process, that gradual accumulation of change produced by consistent practice, is what Marcus Aurelius lived for decades. His meditations record that process, not the final state, where everything's already resolved, the process itself. And that process, with all its failures and returns and imperfect advances, is what's available to you. Starting tonight, with the 3 questions from the 9th lesson. What governed me today? In what specific moment did I lose center? How do I want to respond tomorrow to similar situations? 5 minutes, tonight, and tomorrow morning. With the question from the 10th lesson. What thoughts am I going to allow today? 2 moments, 2 questions. Marcus Aurelius's system in its most essential form, available to you right now. There's something about the practice of the journal that deserves more complete development because it's the tool that most directly transforms knowledge into real change. The knowledge that anger impoverishes you, which you learned in the 3rd episode, doesn't automatically change how you respond when anger arrives. The knowledge that fear lies, which you learned in the 4th, doesn't eliminate fear when it appears in the most intense moment. The knowledge that anxiety destroys the present which you learned in the fifth, doesn't automatically return attention to the present when anxiety drags it toward the future. Knowledge prepares the ground, but prepared ground needs to be worked to produce something, and the journal, the honest review of how those patterns manifested in the specific day that just ended, is exactly that work. When you write tonight that anger appeared in the 3 o'clock meeting and that it governed how you responded to your colleague, you're doing something no podcast episode can do for you. You're seeing with precision where the pattern occurs in your real life, not in the abstract life of a generic listener. In your life, with your colleague, in that specific 3 o'clock meeting. And when you write how you want to respond tomorrow in similar situations, you're doing something equally specific. You're preparing a personalized response for your specific pattern, not the generic response a self-help book proposes for everyone, yours. Based on your analysis of your specific moment of your day, that's what the journal produces, the specificity that general knowledge can't have. Marcus Aurelius understood this with a clarity only someone who's practiced for years has. He wrote about specific situations from his day, about specific people who had irritated him, about concrete moments where his equanimity had given way, about the specific reactions he wanted to change, not abstract principles about how to live better. Concrete analysis of how he had lived that specific day, and that concrete analysis, repeated night after night for years, produced something abstract principles alone can't produce: intimate knowledge of his own patterns, of where exactly his equanimity gave way, with what type of people, in what type of situations, under what conditions. That intimate knowledge is the foundation of real work, because without it, the work is general and its effectiveness is limited. With it, the work is specific and its effectiveness is completely different. Your journal, if you start it tonight and sustain it for 30 days, will give you that intimate knowledge of your own mind that no podcast can give you, because that knowledge can only be built from inside, from the honest record of your own days, from the honest review of your own moments of clarity and your own moments of darkness, from the honesty of someone who sits before the mirror of paper and sees themselves as they are, not as they'd like to be, as they are. That's what Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent, and that's what produces the type of change his meditations document, not the change of someone who learned the principles, the change of someone who lived them, failed them, tried again, failed them again, and kept returning, until with time, with the accumulation of practice, failure became less frequent, the return to center became faster, the space between stimulus and response became larger, not because the work ended, because the work was done, every day, without exception. That's what the journal, the 2 questions, the practice of lessons 9 and 10 offer you, not the destination, the path. And the path starts where it always starts, here, tonight, with the 3 questions. What governed me today? In what specific moment did I lose center? How do I want to respond tomorrow? 5 minutes, tonight, without excuses, without postponing it. 4. When you have more energy, or more time, or more desire, tonight. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait to have more energy. He did it with the energy he had, after days that would have exhausted any reasonable human being, with the Danube cold outside, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, and the journal, always the Marnd. Journal, Always the work, every day. Your turn, tonight. There's more about the 10th lesson that closes the circle of everything the 9 previous ones built. The 2 questions, what thoughts you'll allow in the morning and which governed you at night, aren't just questions. They're the 2 ends of a cycle. The morning question opens the cycle, establishes the intention, gives the mind a direction before the day starts producing its own directions. The night question closes the cycle, evaluates what happened between the morning's intention and the day's reality, identifies the gap, and produces the information that makes tomorrow morning's intention more precise than today's. That cycle, repeated day after day, produces something that doesn't have an exact name, but that Marcus Aurelius knew from direct experience: the progressive calibration of the mind. Each cycle adjusts something. The intention becomes more specific. The evaluation becomes more precise. The gap between intention and reality gets smaller, not dramatically, not from one week to the next, but in a real and verifiable way when you look at the record of 30 days compared to the record of the first week. The first week's intention was general. I want to respond instead of react. The 4th week's intention is specific. In the type of conversation I identified as my most frequent trigger, I want to pause 3 seconds before responding. That specificity, built through the cycle of the 2 questions sustained for a month, is exactly what makes Marcus Aurelius's system more powerful than any collection of general principles, because it's personalized, built on your data, on your life, on your specific patterns, not the generic patterns of an average listener, yours. And that level of specificity is what converts knowledge into real capacity, the capacity to govern your mind in the specific situations where you need it most, with the specific tools that your analysis of your own patterns has shown you work for you. That's what the 2 questions, practiced with consistency, produce over time, available to you, starting tonight. Tonight, with the 3 questions of the nightly review, and tomorrow morning, with the question of intention. The cycle starts where it always starts, here, now, with the decision to start. We've reached the end of episode 7 of Master Your Mind, the Marcus Aurelius episode, the episode of governing the mind. The episode that took the work of the 6 previous ones and placed it in the most powerful context that exists for understanding it. The most powerful man in the ancient world, struggling every night in his journal to govern the hardest thing there is, his own mind. Let's walk through today's 10 lessons. The first showed us that governing the mind is the most difficult and important work a human being can do, and that Marcus Aurelius, with all the external power available, knew it better than anyone precisely because he had everything and discovered that none of it produced the inner governance he sought. The second showed us that inner peace doesn't depend on external circumstances, that Marcus Aurelius maintained the practice during wars, plagues, betrayals, and devastating losses, and that the inner peace he practiced didn't depend on those things ending to exist. The third showed us that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts, and that the colors that habitually tint the mind determine the quality of the experience of everything else, and that those colors can be governed with more precision than we've probably been using. The fourth showed us that the emperor's secret wasn't avoiding problems, but training himself to respond better to them. And that training is the only thing the accumulation of favorable external circumstances can't substitute. The fifth showed us the practice of morning preparation, anticipating difficulty before it arrives, so it doesn't steal your calm when it appears. The disposition of the athlete who trains for competition they know will be demanding. The sixth showed us where real strength lives, not in external circumstances you don't control, in governing your own mind, which is the only source of strength external circumstances can't take away. The seventh showed us that things don't have the power to disturb us. We are the ones who give them that power with our judgments. And that judgment, seen clearly, can be examined and can be governed. The eighth showed us the practice of seeing things as they really are, without the embellishments the mind adds, and that the difference between the weight of bare reality and the weight of reality with its embellishments is frequently where most unnecessary suffering lives. The ninth showed us that the meditations weren't written for anyone other than their author, and that's exactly what makes them extraordinary, and that your own meditations, if you start them tonight, can do for you what Marcus Aurelius's did for him. And the 10th, which closes this episode's content, gave you the practice. 2 questions every day, without exception. What thoughts you'll allow today in the morning, and what thoughts governed you tonight. That's the beginning of governing your mind. That's what Marcus Aurelius did, available to you. Now, there's something this close needs to say directly before the episode ends. The knowledge of Marcus Aurelius's tools without the practice of Marcus Aurelius's tools doesn't produce Marcus Aurelius's result. That may seem obvious when said that way, but it isn't in everyday practice, because knowledge feels like progress, feels like advancement. Listening to this episode, understanding the 10 lessons, recognizing in them things that resonate with your own experience, all of that produces a genuine feeling that something is happening, and something is happening, but it's not enough. Knowledge is the map. The work is walking, and walking requires something knowledge alone can't give. Repeated practice in the real conditions of your life. Not in ideal conditions where practice would be easy, in the conditions you have, with the circumstances you have, with the problems you have, exactly where you are. Marcus Aurelius didn't learn about Stoicism and then wait for favorable conditions to practice it. He practiced it in the most unfavorable conditions that existed. And precisely that, is what produced the character his contemporaries documented and his meditations record. Not the knowledge of the principles, the practice of the principles in the real conditions of his life. Your life has conditions, not as extreme as Marcus Aurelius's on the Danube frontier, but real, with their own difficulties, their own triggers, their own moments where governing the mind is hardest and where automatic reaction arrives before you've had time to choose. In those moments is the work, in the tense meeting, in the conversation that could veer toward conflict, in the friction situation that appears without warning, in the moment where everything pushes toward the reaction you didn't want to have. In that exact moment, Marcus Aurelius's question, am I responding or am I being governed? That question, in that moment, even if you don't have time for more than an instant to ask it, that instant is enough. It's the beginning of the space between stimulus and response. It's the beginning of governing the mind, available, always, regardless of what's happening. Before this episode closes, I want to ask you for something different. Not the supportive comment, not the thumbs up. Something more honest. Think about what governed you most this week that you hadn't chosen to have govern you. the thought that arrived uninvited and settled in, the emotion that took control, the reaction that happened before you could choose. Got it? Go to the comments and give it a name. Not the full story, just the name. Just one phrase that describes it, because naming it in public is the first act of governance over it. It's telling it, I see you, I know you're there, and starting today, I choose how to respond. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read to know they're not alone in this work. Go, write it. In the next episode, we're going to talk about provocations. If governing your mind is the internal work, facing provocations is the external test. The moment where everything you practiced inside confronts what the world presents outside. When someone deliberately tries to destabilize you. When external circumstances push with all their force against the center you've been building, does that center hold? The next episode is called, When the World Pushes, the Stoic Doesn't Move. And it's built directly on everything this episode established. The governance of the mind as daily practice. Start it this morning with Marcus Aurelius's question, what thoughts am I going to allow today? This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about the close of this episode that connects Marcus Aurelius's work with everything that comes after in this series. The 7 episodes of Master Your Mind build something cumulatively. They're not 7 disconnected episodes about 7 different topics. They're 7 layers of the same work. The first woke you to the problem that you react, that there's an automatic pattern operating. The second gave you the instrument, the space between stimulus and response. The third applied that instrument to anger, the emotion that destroys outward. The fourth applied it to fear, the emotion that paralyzes inward. The fifth applied it to anxiety, the state that pulls you from the present. The sixth applied it to words, strategic silence, as the first external demonstration of the internal work. And this 7th took all those instruments and placed them within the most complete system that exists for governing the mind. Marcus Aurelius's system, the morning preparation, the nightly review, the inner citadel, the journal, the 2 questions that structure each day, not as separate tools, as the coherent framework that unites them and gives them greater effectiveness than any of them has alone. And the next episode is going to put that framework to the test, provocations, because governing the mind isn't just an internal exercise. It's a capacity that's demonstrated when the external world pushes with all its force and the center that was built doesn't give way. When someone deliberately tries to pull you from center, when circumstances conspire for you to lose what you've been building, in that moment, the work of the 7 previous episodes has its most real test. Does the citadel hold? Does the space between stimulus and response hold when the stimulus comes with the specific intention that it shouldn't? Does the governance of the mind hold when the world does everything possible to govern you? The next episode gives you the tools for it to hold, for the provocation to find in you something it wasn't expecting to find, the calm of someone who governs their mind, the strength of someone who's built something inside that no external pressure can take. That's what's coming. Today, practice the beginning of the system. The 2 questions. This morning, what thoughts am I going to allow today? Tonight, which ones governed me? That's enough to start. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about the journey of the 10 lessons that deserves to be said in a way that goes beyond summary. What Marcus Aurelius built in his Meditations isn't a collection of clever ideas. It's a living system, a system that has an internal logic that reinforces itself when practiced completely. The morning preparation feeds the ability to anticipate. Anticipation feeds the ability not to be caught off guard. The absence of surprise widens the space between stimulus and response. That widened space feeds the ability to examine the judgment, producing the disturbance. The examination of judgment feeds the ability to see things with more precision. Greater precision feeds the experience that reality is more manageable than it seemed from inside habitual thoughts. And the nightly review closes the cycle and prepares the next day. Each part of the system feeds the others, and the result of that system, sustained with consistent practice over weeks, months, and years, is exactly what the Meditations document in Marcus Aurelius: a character, not perfect, not without moments of setback, not without the honest failures the journal itself documents, but real, verifiable, built on the practice of every day. The character of the man who, when external circumstances push with all their force, has something inside that pushes back with equal force. The governance of his own mind. That's what this episode offers you. Not as a promise the system will work perfectly from day one, as a description of what the system produces when practiced with the consistency it requires. And that production, that character emerging from sustained practice, is exactly what the episodes ahead are going to test. The provocations of the next episode. The inner mastery of the final episodes. Everything builds on what this episode established. The governance of the mind as daily practice, as the most important work a human being can do, as the work Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent on the Danube frontier, with the world pushing from every angle. And that you can start this morning with the simplest question that exists: what thoughts am I going to allow today? This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about the journey of the 10 lessons this close can't leave unsaid. The 10 lessons of this episode aren't 10 independent ideas. They're the same idea seen from 10 angles. The idea that governing the mind is available now. In the circumstances you have, with the problems you have, with the mind you have. The first lesson says it from Marcus Aurelius's example, that if the most powerful man in the world needed it and practiced it, then neither power nor resources nor favorable circumstances are conditions for doing it. The second says it from inner peace, that it doesn't depend on external circumstances improving to exist. The third says it from the color of thoughts, that you can govern the color with more precision than you've been using. The fourth says it from training, that governing the mind doesn't arrive without deliberate, constant work. The fifth says it from preparation, that anticipating difficulty before it arrives completely changes the ability to respond when it arrives. The sixth says it from the source of strength, that real strength doesn't live where you've been looking for it. The seventh says it from judgment, that between the event and the disturbance, there's a step that's yours and can be examined. The eighth says it from perception, that reality without embellishments is more manageable than reality with the embellishments the mind adds. The ninth says it from recording, that the journal Marcus Aurelius maintained for decades can be yours too. And the 10th says it from practice, that 2 questions every day without exception are enough to start the system. 10 angles. One truth: governing the mind is available for you now. There's more the close of this episode needs to say about what's coming. The 5 episodes remaining in Master Your Mind are going to build on what this episode established. The next episode is going to put Marcus Aurelius's system to the most concrete, most everyday test that exists: provocations. When someone deliberately tries to pull you from center, when circumstances conspire for you to lose what you've been building, when the system faces exactly the situation it was designed to withstand, does it hold? The next episode gives you the specific tools for it to hold. For whoever provokes to find in you something they weren't expecting, the calm of someone who governs their mind, the serenity of someone who's built something inside that no external pressure can fully take. But those tools work better when this episode's system is already underway, when the 2 questions have already been practiced for days, when the journal has already started building visibility of patterns, when the morning preparation is already changing how the day begins. That's why the most important thing you can do before the next episode is start this one's practice tonight with the 3 questions, tomorrow morning with the question of what thoughts you'll allow. That's all you need for the next episode to land on prepared ground. And that prepared ground completely changes what the next episode can produce. Not information about how to handle provocations, the real capacity to handle them. Built on the practice this episode establishes, available to you. If you decide to start tonight, with the 3 questions, without excuses, without postponing, tonight, exactly as Marcus Aurelius did in his campaign tent, in the conditions he had, with the work that was worth it every day. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about this close that needs to be said with the same honesty Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations with. This episode isn't going to change your life. This episode's practice can. That distinction is the most important thing you can take away. Listening to today's 10 lessons gave you the map, showed you the system, explained with precision what Marcus Aurelius did, why he did it, and what it produced when he did it with the consistency he gave it. That's the map. The map is not the territory. The territory is your life, your days, your triggers, your moments of clarity and your moments of darkness. The real conversations with the real people of your real life. The real problems you have to face with the real resources you have available. In that territory, the map is only useful if you use it to walk. And walking means one single thing: practicing. Tonight, the 3 questions. What governed me today? In what specific moment did I lose center? How do I want to respond tomorrow? Tomorrow morning, the morning preparation question. What kind of difficulties might today bring? From what place do I want to respond to them? And, during the day, when you notice something external is taking governance of your mind, Marcus Aurelius's question: am I responding or am I being governed? 3 moments, 3 questions. The complete system in its most essential version. It doesn't require more time than Marcus Aurelius devoted in his campaign tent. It requires the decision to do it. That decision is yours, and it's the only thing this episode, with everything it contains, can't do for you. Decide. Marcus Aurelius decided every night, regardless of what had happened during the day. Regardless of whether the day had been a triumph or a failure in terms of governing his mind, he opened the journal, and decided to return. That's what this episode asks of you, that you decide to return. Tonight, with the 3 questions, and tomorrow morning, with the preparation question, and every day that follows, with the same decision. Not once, not when you feel like it, not when circumstances are favorable. Every day, as Marcus Aurelius did, in the conditions he had, with the work that was worth it, without exception. That commitment, that everyday decision, is exactly what produces the character, the meditations document, not the intention to practice, the practice, not the desire to govern the mind, the governance of the mind, one question at a time, one day at a time. Time, starting tonight. There's something Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that is the best close this episode can have. He wrote that very little is needed for a well-lived life. Not wealth, not power, not perfect circumstances. Very little. A journal, 2 questions, the decision to do it every day, and the honesty to see yourself as you are when you sit before the paper. That's very little, and it produces everything. The governance of the mind, the inner citadel nobody can take, the calm that doesn't depend on the world being at peace, the strength that doesn't depend on circumstances being favorable. All of that from very little, available to you tonight with the 3 questions. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Before this episode closes entirely, there's something about the connection between Marcus Aurelius's work and the work of the next 5 episodes in this series that deserves to be named. This episode established the system. The 5 that follow are going to test it and deepen it. The 8th episode is going to work on provocations, the moment when someone deliberately tries to destabilize you, where the system you built faces the most direct pressure it can receive, where the inner citadel has to withstand something designed to topple it. The morning preparation you started practicing with this episode completely changes what the 8th can produce. Because when you arrive at that episode with days of accumulated practice, with the visibility the journal will have given you about your specific triggers, with the morning preparation already installed as habit, the tools for provocations land on prepared ground. And prepared ground changes everything. Not the information about how to handle provocations, the real capacity to handle them. That capacity is built here, tonight, with the 3 questions. And it's reinforced every day. The practice is sustained. Every morning the preparation occurs before the day starts pushing. Every night the review produces information about that specific day's patterns. That accumulated work is what makes it possible for the episodes ahead to produce something more than knowledge, to produce capacity, the real capacity of the man who governs his mind, not in theory, in the everyday practice of his life, with his circumstances, with his triggers, with his moments of clarity and his moments of darkness, exactly as Marcus Aurelius built it, in his. Tonight begins the same work, with very little. A place to write, 5 minutes, the 3 questions, and the decision to return tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that follows, without exception, as Marcus Aurelius did. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Now comes the part that separates those who listen from those who truly change. This community exists because you decide it exists, not with words, with actions. If something you heard today moved you inside, leave your reflection here. The one that gets the most support becomes the banner of this community, the collective voice of everyone who chose not to give up. A community that doesn't run from pain, that walks through it, with courage, with judgment, with honor. But listening isn't enough. You know it, you feel it. There's a difference between the one who consumes wisdom and the one who turns it into armor. That's why we created the Stoic Code. 2 principles forged over millennia by the most powerful minds in history. It's not just another book. It's a manual of psychological warfare against your own weaknesses. Each principle includes the deep teaching, its modern application, and an exercise you can implement today, not tomorrow, today. If you decide to get it, you're not just taking something for your growth. You become part of this mission. You help us bring Stoicism to thousands of people who are right now where you once were, who struggle, who fall, who need a word to remind them who they are. Your support keeps this podcast alive. It drives it. It expands it. Thanks to you, this doesn't stop. The link is in the description of this episode. Everything you need is right there. We'll see you in the next episode of Stoicism for Winners. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, without fail. Stoic sessions designed to be with you when life gets heavy, when staying calm is hard, when you need someone to remind you who you are before you forget it yourself. Follow us. The Stoic who doesn't train in calm won't find calm when the storm arrives. Until the next episode, we walk this path together, and every day there are more of us who choose not to give up. Remember this: you are the sole owner of your perception, the architect of your peace, the only one responsible for the war you choose to fight or the one you choose to end. That is Stoicism, not a philosophy, a way of being unbreakable. This is Stoicism for Winners.